Now let us look at the next step. Step 4, which is a very, very important step. It is to check complementary pair. Complementary pair is a very important concept in syllogism, and we should understand the basics of it. Then only we will be able to check for complementary pair. Let us see the working. What is the meaning of the word complementary pair? We have got two complements in English. Complement I and the other is complement E. What is the difference between the two? Suppose I say Sudha is a very intelligent girl. I am paying compliments to her. PLI. What is complement? Complement means one supports the other. For example, this is a pen. Now, if you only have a pen without ink, you cannot write. If you only have ink without pen, you cannot write. For you to write, you need both. You need ink as well as the pen. Therefore, pen and ink are complementary. One complements the other. Horse and cart, they are complementary. Because you have to carry a very heavy load. A horse alone cannot carry. If you have only horse, you cannot carry it. On the other hand, if you have a cart, you cannot carry it. You need both horse and the cart to carry a very heavy load. Therefore, they are complementary. Similarly, in our inquiries, some of the conclusions may be complementary. We have to check for the complementary pair. There are three conditions that must be satisfied to call two conclusions are complementary. First condition is both conclusions must be false. The moment when you get in any of your working, two conclusions are wrong, then an alarm bell should ring in your mind. That alarm bell is called a complementary pair. Whenever you find two conclusions are wrong, immediately stop and then you have to check for complementary pair. So the first condition is both conclusions must be false. The second condition for two conclusions to be a complementary pair is that the conclusions, both conclusions must have the same subject and the same predicate. The conclusions, please understand conclusions. Some people will check in the statements. I have seen some students checking for complementary pair in the statement, not in the statement, in the conclusions. The conclusions should have the same subject and predicate. This is the second condition that must be satisfied. It is, I used to compare this like malarial check. Suppose somebody gets shivering with fever and he goes to the doctor. The doctor will say this is a possible case of malaria. He will start giving malarial drug. No, he will want it to be checked whether this is malaria or not. Therefore, he will ask the patient to go and check for malaria. So the patient will go to a testing institute and they will draw say a few cc of blood and then they will put it under a microscope and see whether there is any malarial parasite. If there is a malarial parasite, then it is positive, otherwise it is not malaria. and after getting the test, the doctor will say, if the test is positive, he will give medicines for malaria, otherwise he will give some other antibiotic. It is something like that. If you have two conditions which are false, then this alarm bell of complementary pair should ring in your mind. It is something like checking for malaria. So here, for complementary pair, three conditions must be satisfied. Second condition is the conclusions should have the same subject and same predicate. The condition is that the conclusions should belong to AO, IO or IE. Any one of these three possible combinations. If they don't belong to any of these three possible combinations, then it is not complementary pair. If all the three conditions are satisfied, then you call the conclusions as complementary pair. Okay, what is the effect of calling two conclusions as complementary pair? The effect of calling two conclusions as a complementary pair is that it is wrong to say both the conclusions are false. What you have to say is either conclusion 1 or conclusion 2 is valid. Either one of them is valid. If conclusion 1 is valid, then conclusion 2 is not valid. If conclusion 2 is valid, conclusion 1 is not valid. Therefore, either conclusion 1 or conclusion 2 is valid. That is the correct conclusion we have to arrive at by method of verifying complementary pair. As I told you, wherever you get two conclusions are wrong, the alarm bell of complementary pair, checking for complementary pair must ring in your mind, and you start checking, and there are three conditions. What are the three conditions? Both conclusions must be false. The second condition is that the conclusions must have the same subject and predicate, and third is the conclusions must belong to AO, IO or IE type. Now let us see an example which will clearly clarify what is complementary pair. Now this is an example for complementary pair. Statement 1 is some pandas are herbivores, and statement 2 is no panda is a giraffe. Let us see the working. Check for complementary pair. Statement 1, some pandas are herbivores. I-type statement. Statement 2, no panda is a giraffe. E-type. What are the conclusions to be tested? 1. Some herbivores are giraffe. I-type. Then statement 2. No herbivore is a giraffe. E-type. Now we have to test these conclusions, which is mediate inference. Now if you look at it, mediate inference means first whether there is any common term. Yes, panda is here, panda is here. But they are not aligned. We have to align them. We have to align them by converting, because the subject of both statements are pandas. Which statement should be aligned? I eat apple. Some pandas are herbivores, I type. No panda is giraffe. So we have to convert I type. So let us convert it. Some herbivores are pandas. I type. No panda is a giraffe. I'll write here. I am simply writing this statement here. This is the first statement converted. No panda is a giraffe. E type. Panda and panda. It will cancel. Common term is there. It can be cancelled. Then what is the conclusion? You can draw. I am Indian and I eat onion. O. O is the I plus E is equal to O. The only valid conclusion that you can draw is O type. What is O type? Some herbivores are not giraffe. That is the only herbivores are not giraffe. Which is the O type conclusion, which is the only valid conclusion you can draw. Since this is the only valid conclusion you can draw, all other conclusions, namely some herbivores are giraffe and no herbivore is giraffe, they are both false. Therefore, this is a false and this is the conclusions. Both conclusions given in the question are false because we can only arrive at one conclusion. Some herbivores are not giraffe. Now we have arrived at this, we can cancel now. We have arrived at this position where two conclusions are wrong. If two conclusions are wrong, what should happen to you? An alarm bell should ring in your mind. That alarm bell is called complementary pair. Check for complementary pair. What are the three conditions to be checked for complementary pair? First condition is both conclusions must be false. Here both conclusions we have arrived logically are false. What is the second condition to be tested for complementary pair? The subject and predicate of the conclusions must be the same. Let us check. The subject of the conclusion and the predicate of the conclusions, both conclusions, they are same. The subject of the first conclusion and the second conclusion are the same. The predicate of the first conclusion and the predicate of the second conclusion are the same. Therefore, condition number 2 is satisfied. What is the third condition for satisfying complementary pair? The third condition is the conclusions must belong to AO, IO or IE. These are the three types they should belong to. Here it is IE. Therefore, the third condition is also satisfied. We have seen one of first three conditions must be satisfied for being a complementary pair. First condition is both conclusions must be false, satisfied. Second condition is the subject and predicate of the conclusions must be the same, satisfied. Third, the conclusions must belong to AO, IO or IE type. Here it is IE type. Therefore, third condition is also satisfied. If all the three conditions are satisfied, it is wrong to say both the conclusions are false. What we should say is either 1 or 2 is either conclusion 1 or 2 is true. So either 1 or 2 is true is the correct conclusion we should draw because the conclusions belong to complementary pair. Now we have just seen complementary pair, and whatever we have seen is shown in this slide number 30, which talks about the condition number 1 and condition number 2 of a complementary pair. And this slide number 31, is talking about the third condition of complementary pair. This is just a reinstatement of what we have already discussed under complementary pair.